Well, I'm assuming that we're on with our audience at this point, and I am looking forward to this next 75 minutes with you all. My name is Tom Leavitt, and I'm president of Northfield Savings Bank, and this is a destination check. You are coming into the Supporting Business Creation, Workforce, and Innovation panel. This is part of the Vermont Proposition topic, or part 6. And you heard Paul Costello in the general session earlier talk about some of the high points of this this topic, but we're going to dive into some of the details today. And we've got a terrific panel with us, and we're still trying to get everyone totally mic'd up here, but we're going to go ahead as we're able and get underway. So the conversation that we're going to have is one I think that is a fundamental health dynamic in our state, and that is that the economic vitality that is born of the ingenuity and sweat of our people is a lot of what makes Vermont what it is. I think I might have just heard sound from Dr. Akande. Is that coming through okay? All right, great. We look forward to your participation, sir. So I don't really presuppose how to dive into such a wide open and important element of the Vermont proposition, but we've got these 4 distinguished panelists that are going to lend their experiences and expertise. But before I introduce each of them, and then they'll have a minute to say hello to you, I am going to simply read some brief selected excerpts from the proposition part 6. And that proposition states Vermont must strengthen local business, entrepreneurship, investment, workforce, and rural innovation. And the excerpts I want to point out to you are as follows, and this will only take a couple of minutes. 1, and I won't number them all. I'll just read them and take a pause between each. We need to attract, develop, and support entrepreneurs who build and grow creative businesses in the state. We need to support more businesses through their initial stages of development and growth to a scale that benefits more Vermonters. We also need to support places that create density, community, and the collision of ideas. Every entrepreneur should feel like they have a local option to safely experiment with ideas and a supportive cohort of innovators to help them hone their business concepts. We need to identify the areas of opportunity and growth for local entrepreneurship and in attracting the next generation of innovators and invest in and boost those arenas. We have a huge opportunity to further develop and encourage business ownership among people traditionally underrepresented in the business community, including women, BIPOC Vermonters, lower income community members, and people with different abilities. Vermont's creative sector is an enormously important driver of cultural stewardship, sense of place, and innovation. We need to experiment more with microlending and crowdfunding models and need to make sure that our economic support systems are transparent and inclusive. The state of Vermont needs to use its purchasing power to leverage innovation in the products and services produced in state. Everyone needs to be able to reach the global marketplace. We need to figure out how to encourage young people to live here. We need to focus on 21st century skills that would make it possible for students to start businesses, manage their finances, and secure high-paying jobs. We need to brace ourselves for the oncoming wave of automation, and we need to adapt to it. So all of the statements that I just read are embedded within the long version of the Vermont proposition in part 6, and that's our topic today. So to get underway, it's my pleasure to introduce to you our panelists. First, Benjamin Akande. Dr. Benjamin Ola Akande has been appointed as Director of Human Resources, Diversity, and Inclusion for Stifel Financial Corporation, a $27 billion diversified global financial services firm based in St. Louis. Dr. Akande most recently served as president of Champlain College here in Burlington. Previously, he was Assistant Vice Chancellor at Washington University in St. Louis and president and faculty member at Westminster College, also in Missouri. He has done significant consulting work in the private sector in the areas of strategy, leadership development, corporate responsibility, and market positioning for Fortune 500 companies. Dr. Akande holds a PhD in economics from the University of Oklahoma and completed postdoctoral studies at JFK School of Government, Harvard University, and Said Business School at Oxford University. My pleasure, sir, to turn it over to you for your opening. Hello.
Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
It's good to know that. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm really glad to be here. Let me just say briefly that my 1 year experience in Vermont was a compelling experience because I saw and I experienced the remarkable resiliency and the fortitude of the people of Vermont. And you may be small, but you are mighty in your thinking and in your strategy and in your commitment to one another. And so my hope this afternoon is that we will talk about how can we raise up the proposition for the future of Vermont? How do we move beyond the 9 well-stated propositions into action statements that would essentially be able to move Vermont from success to significance? You see, because I really believe that significance is where Vermont needs to be headed, and it's a very difficult place to get to. But I believe firmly that in the articulated propositions, it can be done, and it will be a major differentiator for the state of Vermont. I look forward to conversation with my colleagues here this afternoon, and I thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Next, we have Janette Bombardier. Janette is Chief Operating Officer and Chief Technology Officer at Chroma Technology and 89 North, advanced technology companies. Chroma, based in Bellows Falls, is a leading manufacturer and OEM supplier of highly precise optical filters. 89 North, based in Williston, is taking leading optical engineering research and solutions to applications that transform traditional industries. Much of Janet's prior career commitment was to IBM. She rose in engineering to become the Vermont Senior Location Executive overseeing IBM Essex Junction and later Global Foundries. She moved to the executive team at Green Mountain Power before taking on her current assignment 3 years ago. Janette is a licensed professional engineer and holds BS and MS degrees from the University of Vermont in civil engineering. Welcome, Janette.
Thank you. So 2 topics I hope we can potentially dwell on today as I read the report, or maybe 2 omissions. On the first, I think particularly for rural Vermont, is to recognize what I'm going to call the incumbents. And these are the scale manufacturing operations that are in some of our most rural locations. And not to pick out all of them, but you take a Mac Molding in Arlington, or a Weidman in St. Jay, or a GW Plastics in Bethel, Superior Technical Ceramics in St. Albans. These are all companies that have scale. And I think an important part of our focus, because companies with scale can bring a lot to Vermont. They have a devastating impact on rural Vermont when they leave, but they offer a variety of jobs. They can bring in internships. They can do R&D. We should support them more in that area. But I think we have to have a conversation about how we keep them and grow them, and not just grow new business. On the Vermonter side, in the labor force, there's always a lot of switching gears. There's always a lot of conversation about, bringing the kids back. But what also is important, VSAC, did a very large study on this, and our own education data would share this, but we're losing our boys. And what I mean by that is they're not going anywhere, and they're not really becoming productive citizens. And so I do think an important goal is, however we choose to word it, is ensure every Vermonter can become a productive citizen. because there is a large number that we're just losing to no direction. And I think it's a huge opportunity to work with those, particularly young men. This is definitely a boy issue, or a dominant boy issue. But I think they're very important for us to focus on, not just on how do we bring others back.
Janet, thank you for those remarks. Our next panelist is Monique Priestley. Monique has been working in technology-related positions since 2001, doing network administration, database management, web design and development, social media marketing, digital communication strategy, and customer support. She is the COVID Business Recovery Project Manager for the Vermont office of the Center for Women in Enterprise. She continues to perform development work for Campus CE based in Seattle. Monique serves as Executive Director for the Space on Main, which she founded and opened in Bradford in 2018, and I see that she's sitting in right now. It has brought together community and co-working connection among people in the Upper Valley. She earned a BA from Lyndon State College and a master's in digital media from the University of Washington. Welcome, Monique.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Thanks, everybody. Super excited to be here. I think the things I'm kind of most excited about in this proposition is one, remote work, which is something, Sam and I and a lot of different co-working spaces around the state, we're trying to figure out how to market co-working and get people to understand what remote work is. And now I think after a year, people actually understand it. So I'm hoping going into the next year, people begin to see it as a resource if they're continuing to work from home. And co-working spaces are really just not just for co-working and remote workers, but tend to be entrepreneurial hubs, not just in Vermont, but across the country and across the globe. There tend to be kind of hotbeds for startup programming, incubation, accelerators. And coming out of COVID, unlike other recessions in the past, we're actually seeing a real boom in people who want to become entrepreneurs. I think a lot of people did a kind of self-check during COVID to see what was important to them for maybe the first times in their lives. And a lot of people are like, I don't want to work for somebody else anymore. I want to start my own thing. So I think it's important to give them the tools to do that. And then something that comes up a lot in our area and everywhere in Vermont is kind of the 10,000 job gap, trying to fill those for technical trades. And I think a lot of that, I think we could do ourselves a favor trying to introduce technical trades at a younger age for students. I know that's something we deal with a lot in our town because we have a technical center and a high school, and trying to get students introduced to that. So those are the things I'm most excited, and I'm excited to hear from everybody else. Thanks.
Thanks, Monique. Sam Roach-Gerber. Sam is Vice President at Vermont Center for Emerging Technologies, VCET. VCET's mission is to offer actionable advantage to Vermont's entrepreneurs through people, places, and capital. Sam is a startup advisor, podcast co-host, college instructor, and has been Director of Innovation at VCET prior to her appointment as Vice President. Sam's earlier experience was with Vermont Farm Table. She is active in various community boards. Sam earned a BA from Northeastern University, where she took full advantage of co-op opportunities, and she holds an MBA from Champlain College. Welcome, Sam.
Thanks so much, Tom. I'm really excited to be here and just so honored given my amazing other panelists here today. I'm totally going to take advantage of the fact that I'm last and likely go over a minute, which I think is fair, right? First, I just wanted to echo Monique on a lot of what she said. Obviously, the work we do is similar. We overlap a lot and work together. But yes to remote work. And actually, we see at VCET that a lot of times folks come to Vermont starting as remote workers. And then after a year or two at VCET, they cannot help themselves but network and get jobs at Vermont companies. So I have 5 or 6 examples just right in my head today. So that's just another reason I think we need to support those folks. So what I thought, there's, we're drinking from a fire hose today. So what I thought would be most helpful is just to focus on 3 points of our area that are particularly important to me and just on the top of my head today. The first is that when it comes to workforce development and scaling our startups, I believe we must ensure mentorship through experiential learning. And Tom, you touched on my experience at Northeastern, doing 6-month internships or co-op programs. You know, the colleges and universities need to make this easy for students to take on longer term internships. I don't think 3 months is going to cut it. And we need to incentivize them through payment and not just credit. The good news is that I believe the colleges and universities in Vermont already know this. Examples include Middlebury's New Millennium Fund and UVM's recent micro internship program. What seems to be unknown and perhaps most important is that the startups and solar founders in Vermont need more support, guidance, and incentives to utilize interns. Often they don't even know it's an option. And I believe it's Vermont's responsibility to fix this. Next, I think recent graduates need entry-level jobs with livable wages. Offering a $30,000 salary to a full-time entry-level position simply because of limited experience doesn't make sense and it's not fair. So we need to figure out how to change this. Second, entrepreneurial hubs or innovation hubs like you know, the space on Main that Monique runs or VSET needs to be inclusive and accessible to all. The state needs to support these structures so they can grow sustainably. I'm gonna call out Monique. You heard her bio and all the incredible stuff she does. She doesn't need to spend 60% of her time on micro grants. She needs to spend it with the entrepreneurs. So we need to fix that for her and others that are running those hubs. And they frankly can't survive without low overhead. And if not, the cost is on the shoulders of the entrepreneurs. Asking a first-time founder to pay nearly $500 a month for one desk at an innovation space is not going to ensure a diverse pool of entrepreneurs and companies in our state. And finally, before I get too worked up here, I think that we need to lower barriers and level the playing field for all founders, especially when it comes to funding a business. Let's try not to intimidate first-time entrepreneurs with financial jargon, but instead meet them where they're at. So we need to openly and non-judgmentally answer their questions, whether it's what's the difference between debt and equity, when is equity appropriate, and why is debt sometimes actually a good thing. These are all things that I think inhibit some folks from coming and seeking support or funding for their business. And as service providers and entrepreneurial support organizations in Vermont, we need to ask ourselves, who are we missing out on simply because they're too intimidated to approach us for help? And that's something we're thinking a lot about at VSET. I could go on forever, but this is not a one-woman show, so I will wrap it up there and just say I'm really excited to be here, and thank you again, Tom.
That's great. Thanks, Sam. Appreciate that passion and direction for us in this discussion. We've got about 45 minutes before we're going to turn it over to the Q&A. And I'll be checking that part of the Zoom session. I may not look at the chat. The chat is intended more for tech support, and I know our tech host, Meg, is going to be watching that chat box carefully. So I'll be looking at the Q&A box as we get closer to the end of the 45 minutes to see who's out there and what questions you might have. So certainly feel free to queue some of those up in the Q&A. But I'd like to maybe start off because it does say support business creation, workforce, and innovation in that order. I'd like to go out of order myself and actually come back to that workforce question. And I think I'll turn to Dr. Akande and Janette to start. Champlain College, Washington University, Westminster College. Janet's serving on the board of the Vermont State Colleges system, and I know has a passion for the Vermont Academy for Science and Technology, among assets that Vermont Tech has, for instance. Could you just speak to the role of education and workforce in Vermont and how you see it plugging in to address some of the challenges that we face? I'll start with you, Dr. Akande.
Thank you. I think that there is a real opportunity with the educational institutions in Vermont to to hasten the pace of movement towards creating a true entrepreneurial destination for Vermont. And I say so because I think it's going to take some meaningful level of commitment and investment by those educational institutions, and then of course supported by those that have supported those institutions' initiative in recent times. The beauty about this is that each one of our institutions in Vermont tend to have their competitive advantage. And the way I define competitive advantage is what you do that nobody else can do better. And so because we're not replicating ourselves, we have different competitive advantages. In the case of Champlain, our gaming program is one of the top in the country. I know that, and I know that Middlebury and UVM have their specific expertise as well. It allows each one of us to focus on the things that we can do better, and then to be able to get the support to be able to then help rejuvenate and move these entities forward. I'll give you a very, very simple example. Here in St. Louis, Washington University, a top 10 research institution in the United States, took a really bold step about 10, 15 years ago by creating what they call the Cortex Center. And the Cortex Center was essentially an innovation entrepreneurial hub that attracts innovators from every part of the world and provides free space for them to use, and also provides an opportunity for them to propel from where they are to where they want to be. As I speak to you today, this innovation hub has become a multi-billion-dollar proposition, attracting some of the most creative and inventful young minds in the country. In fact, I think there was a report that came out just about a year or so ago, which St. Louis was ranked as one of the most attractive places for women entrepreneurs. And I just thought, wow, that's a defining point. But I think it's going to take a level of commitment that is far and above what we're seeing right now. And what do I mean by that? I would say, for instance, the ability to be able to set up funds, let's say $5 million, that would essentially say that bring your ideas to Vermont. And if it's in the area of gaming, we will collaborate with you with the best minds in our faculty at Champlain, and we will work with others to enable those ideas to be able to come to fruition. I think it's those kinds of true commitments that would essentially help propel us forward. In closing, let me say this. We're coming out of a pandemic of significant proportions, something that we've never really experienced before. And I've gone on record to say that it's an opportunity. It's a pivot moment. It's a chance for us to do what we were afraid to do, but now feel compelled to do. But let me suggest that as we now ease our way out of this pandemic, we've got to realize here that pivots have an expiration date. And that when you miss opportunities to pivot, when you're still talking about what you want to do as opposed to what you need to do and doing it, you simply fall back to the way you were operating before the pandemic. I think that we're running out of time, and I think that there needs to be a sense of constructive impatience here as we seek to move the proposition for the future of Vermont forward. And I think that those areas of what I call viable and enabling areas, such as having an affordable high-speed broadband and cellular access to all Vermonters, should not be negotiable. That's something I know was being talked about when I came to Vermont last year, and we're still talking about it in 2021. I think we need a visible commitment in that area where we can move that to action. And I also believe that particularly, how do we address the issue of entrepreneurship enablers? I think, again, we need a totality of commitment that will bring this forward for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Janet, your perspective.
Yeah, I was going to hit more, I guess, on the workforce side of things in some of my previous comments. You know, given our population, it's very important, right, that every Vermonter participates somehow in our workforce, however they choose. I believe very strongly that we have great programs and we don't need more programs or more schools, right? We have good tech centers. We have, you know, great early college for Vermonters that know about it. And we have great programs, particularly, I'm going to focus more on entry-level programs in the CCVs, in the VTCs, and of course we have wonderful colleges available. So the gap that I think has been out there forever and no one's been able to crack it yet is really how we fund. And so one of our huge challenges of moving a student into the right path for them is that we allocate funds per student to their school. So our traditional high schools aren't necessarily motivated to move our students into a tech center, into maybe an innovative IT program, or even some of the early college programs, because to them they lose, right? They lose 18, I think, thousand, is that what it is this year, per student. So there's no motivation for a high school with declining enrollment to want to give on those funds unless we really focus on the student as a customer and that it's our job to make them successful. And I feel that it's a huge impediment to success in any path if we don't change how that works or change how we measure success. We are very focused on our high school graduation rates, and I'm not saying we shouldn't, but I feel like we're singularly focused on that and not necessarily on, did that student end up on a productive pathway, whatever is right for them. I also think we should be measuring more visibly, and I personally don't know where this stand is. A couple of years ago, we were committed to this pathways approach, which was wonderful. This takes students and helps them investigate what they're interested in, whether it becomes a PhD in a topic or whether it becomes a trade, whatever. We need more transparency in the status of those programs and the participation across the state by our schools in those.
Thank you, Janet. You mentioned in your opening some pretty iconic companies around the state that are not here in Chittenden County. And so you talked about more rural parts of the state where there's already scale. And I would imagine that the workforce issue is all the more acute when you don't have a concentration of academic institutions or people that might be looking to change jobs, but want more options in the vicinity where they're planning to look to go to work.
Right. That large scale in rural Vermont is a huge asset, but it's a huge challenge to survive.
Sam, your co-op experience, is that coming into your head here as you think about workforce?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think folks are maybe sick of me talking about it, but I just, Monique, no. You know, I don't know, 3 months of an internship just isn't enough time, right? It's like you finally figured out your email address login pretty much, or you've maybe just figured out how to build trust and what it looks like to be in a corporate situation or a manufacturing facility or whatever it is. And as soon as you get comfortable, you have to move on, right? And typically you have to move on because you're not getting credit anymore, right? You got credit from your college or university for a 3-month internship. And then, beyond that, there's no incentive, right? So, what can we do to support some of these companies in keeping those interns on? Even if it's 10 hours a week between classes, it makes such a difference. And I think it really helps with direction post grad. At Northeastern, of course, and that's my sort of bias. But they have all these statistics on the number of students that change their major after their first or second co-op experience because they're like, oh my God, like what was I thinking? I can't be a nurse. Like, this is not what I want to do. And then they switch to business and they figure it out, right? They don't have to figure it out when they're, 26 or 27 and in the job they hate, right? And that makes a difference, I think, having that direction. And while I have the floor, I did want to touch on something that Dr. Akande had mentioned, which is sort of the incentivizing businesses to come here and to start companies in Vermont. And I stumbled upon this incentive program in New York the other day that I literally had to read 10 times because like, this can't be right. But essentially, there's a program called Startup NY that offers new and expanding businesses the opportunity to operate tax-free for 10 years, for a decade, if they're on or near eligible university college campuses in New York State. That is something that really incentivizes companies, and it's hard to even imagine, right? But I think that's the type of out of the box thinking that makes entrepreneurs say, maybe here, maybe now.
Thanks very much, Sam. I'm going to switch gears, but happy to have the workforce question find its way back into the thread. But I want to turn to Monique and come to the supporting of business creation question. And you've had a good coast to coast window on that, whether you've been traveling to these places or telecommuting, and you've probably developed some ideas in the wonderful Upper Valley of Vermont, New Hampshire, where I was born, around more rural definitions of business creation. So just be interested in you queuing up that subject here a little bit, Monique.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, I guess the thing we're at the Space on Main working on we did a few kind of business accelerators, like micro accelerators, so a couple weeks, 10 weeks, right before COVID that ended. And that was awesome. Like we had 21 people go through, and a majority of those people actually started businesses even amidst COVID. So that was amazing. But the thing that I'm seeing, like we use a variety of curriculums, which are all awesome. And we had people come in and do some curriculum, Center for Women and Enterprise, before I was working for them, and launch VT's React. And one thing that I would love to see developed in business planning curriculum for rural Vermont is things that focus on what it takes to actually, so, you're going over like the financials and the marketing and the kind of business structure, but nowhere in any of those plans are things like how to network with your Chamber of Commerce, or what does it look like to sit down with your business association and get the support of the people around you on Main Street that are actually going to be the ones that like help you figure out who owns a building. I get that all the time. There's people constantly coming to the Space on Main. There's just like, I have a business, but I have no idea where to go. I don't know who owns the buildings. I don't know how much they cost. I don't know who to talk to. How do you talk to somebody in order to like do that? So just those like basic questions that's just really intimidating for somebody who's, maybe coming, like they've never maybe worked for themselves ever in their lives. And they've always had somebody figure out those questions, those answers for them. So I think that's like tailoring it to the actual problems that are in Vermont, rather than just like how do you start a business in general. It's how do you actually overcome the struggles of what it actually means to be in a town that's only 2,000 people. So yeah, I guess I'll leave it there.
Excellent. Janette, I want to come back to you on the places that you've been, and you've been right at the center of industry in our state for several decades. So whether it's IBM or Green Mountain Power or Chroma, what is the role of the scale companies in business creation?
Oh, that's a great question. I think one is, I'll go to the manufacturing companies. I think what's really important is, whether it's their role or something we just want to encourage, is to have R&D, right? Because when you have R&D within your facility, you will come up with those new ideas and you will potentially create a spin-off. I do think the Chroma 89 North is a great model, right? Complementary product line. Chroma could fund and had the ability to fund the start of that. VSET was a help in starting with some of the business stuff. But it took a couple of years, right, to get it off the ground. And, you know, we just celebrated our 12th anniversary with cake right before this meeting. But it takes a while, particularly in a capital intensive manufacturing needs investment business versus potentially like a software or lower overhead company. So I think the responsibility of those businesses, one is keep some R&D here. Don't just have all your jobs in town or in the state be your low end jobs, but let's have the high end jobs. Commit to doing R&D in the state and think about how you can, you know, whether you just expand your current company or whether you spin off. That is to me a form of growth that might not show as a new company, but definitely shows up as a new job or sustaining a company going forward as technologies become obsolete. I think they owe a key thing in internships because they have the scale to support it and they have the high tech resources to mentor people. That's a huge advantage of a big company, right? Is they've got lots of skill sets to mentor. So I think they must play a role in internships to Vermonters, whether they're high schoolers or you know, from one of the colleges. I think that's absolutely part of what they have to do. Those are the two things that come to mind. I just think it's really important to think about those startups that are capital intensive, particularly people who want to make something, versus those that are providing a service or a software. I think they have very different needs financially, and we have to think about that.
Thank you, Janet. Dr. Akande, Champlain College has been perhaps less, and I don't want to be mischaracterizing here, less focused on manufacturing and more in the technology and software and business and accounting and management spaces. Do correct me if I'm wrong, but when you think about this issue of business creation and the role that an institution like Champlain College plays in Vermont, I'd be interested in your observations over the last year.
I think what we have found based on the numerous conversations that we've had with faculty is that business creation is not a one-dimensional process where you take a young mind that's got all this remarkable ideas in gaming and you sort of set that kid free to go out there and create games. But you've got to also be able to prepare that young mind in terms of how do you put a business plan together? How do you strategically plan the execution? How are you going to be able to source funding from potential investors? And so what you're going to be seeing in the next couple of years coming out of Champlain is more of a multidisciplinary approach to learning and teaching, and to ensure that the students come out having a totality of preparation that covers the business side, the technical side, and then that gray area of, you know, basically pulling it all together. And I think that you're going to see a level of real-time experimentation that will, I think clearly with the notion that students, by the time they're in their third or maybe their final year, I've already designed a business plan. I've already found a way to execute that business plan. I've already put a prototype together. I'm talking to potential investors. That real-time perspective, I think, is what it's going to take for institutions like Champlain and others to be able to be serious contributors. And when you think about it, we're not really, trying to do something that's never been done before, because we got some remarkable benchmarks to look at. If we look at what Stanford has been able to do and how they've been able to produce the next generation of technology innovation and sort of change the game, and how that has been extremely successful. It speaks to the fact that small institutions that can turn the boat around quicker have even a greater chance of being able to make this thing come to fruition. But I say this in conclusion. I think the reality is this: where do we start? How do we start? And are we going to be bold enough to be able to draw a line in the sand and saying that this is where we're going? I saw a question in the chat section in which the individual referred to what he characterized as a closed-eye vision. What is going to be Vermont's closed-eye vision? I love the way that is characterized, because what closed-eye vision basically says, you know what, I'm going to close my eyes and I'm going to dream big. I'm going to articulate a vision that is really compelling, and I'm going to stress a significant moon goal that will take us beyond where we are. And I think that's exactly what moon goals are. When John F. Kennedy talked about moon goals back in the 60s, he talked about how difficult it is to do these things. And then he talked about how necessary it is for us to move in that direction. And he talked about how important it is to have that kind of success. I think the charge to all higher educational institutions in Vermont moving forward should be to create the kind of programs that would have a direct contribution to the state of Vermont in terms of job creation, in terms of the ability for us to keep these young minds in Vermont so they don't go to other places. And thirdly, the ability to attract the best minds from anywhere in the world to be able to come and study in Vermont, but most importantly, recognize that at the completion of their study, they will have the support both from the private and public sector to be able to make their vision and make their dreams come true. And I think that's what it's going to take. And we have to do all these things in real time, because we're running out of time. And that and if we don't do it, other states are doing it. They're taking these young minds away from us. And we've got to be bold, we've got to be audacious, and we have to do it now.
Thank you, Sam. VSET and its juxtaposition here in the one and only MSA in Vermont, and how it interfaces with the academic side of things, or anything else you might want to add to this discussion at this point.
Love the open-endedness there. Yeah, I mean, I think, a lot of folks are talking about dreaming big, and I think that's key. And I think we've been, so for context, within the last 10 months, my partner, Dave Bradbury, and I have met with 359 entrepreneurs in the state of Vermont. 359 people that are starting or scaling a business here. And that's, what we're counting one meeting, right? If we maybe met with them 10 times. But it just shows there's no shortage of people that want to start something here or scale something here. And they're eager, right? And a lot of them have the tools they need. But there's a lot of disconnect still. And I think Janet brought up a great point where we have all these resources, right? We just need to connect them and use them. And I think, when I have a conversation with someone who maybe just stumbled upon VSET, and then I said, well, I assume you've already spoke to the SBDC and CWE. And they're like, the what, the who? They don't know about these resources that are free and accessible, that really make all the difference in the world for companies just starting out. So I think a big part of it is just cross-pollination, right? We have these minds, we have these resources, and how can we put the best interest of the entrepreneur first? And of course, my bias is towards entrepreneurs, but I think about how hard it's been for VSET to make the case to recapitalize the seed fund. We need to think about these technology companies not in 2021 or 2022, but 10, 15, 20 years down the road, because those are the companies that are hiring, right? You look at a company like Faraday, right? If VSET hadn't invested in them, when they did at the start of the Vermont Seed Capital Fund, would they be hiring 40, 50 positions right now? The answer is no, they wouldn't. So if we don't see the importance of investing in these early stage companies now, both literally in terms of financial investment, but in also, offering our resources and, a space in Bradford and students from Champlain and, resources from Janet, we can't support these companies, and they won't get to the stage where they're hiring 40 or 50 people.
Do you think the urgency that Dr. Akande was referring to, and then the funds that Senator Leahy was talking about in the opening session, that our congressional delegation has been successful in directing to Vermont, and the way the governor and the General Assembly have been deliberating on responsible uses of those funds, is there enough discussion around business creation in that whole scenario in your mind?
You know, I don't think there's enough. You know, I think, you know, we just successfully recapitalized the seed fund with $900,000, which is great, but it you know, that limits the number of companies that we can invest in. And like I said, if we're not making those investments now, those are jobs that aren't happening down the road. And I think, you know, to spin it back to workforce development, folks that are moving here, that are incentivized or otherwise, you know, they can't have just one option, right? Because they either have, you know, what I've heard called the trailing spouse, or they're like, what if I don't like it at dealer.com, right? Where do I go next? Are there other companies that are a good fit for me? And so I think having that sort of, that portfolio of companies that are hiring and impressive and attracting that top tier talent, that's what's going to make people come here. Like, they need to have more options. And I think that only makes us stronger because these companies can work together. There's so many examples of companies that have worked together in terms of training and development. And that's, you know, for my mind, the more the merrier, but, you know, the funding needs to be there for those early stage companies, because especially the high technology ones, you know, they need the capital up front in order to grow. And that's free revenue most of the time.
Thanks again, Sam. Monique, you did such a good job teeing up the last subject. I'm going to give you another shot at it. This time, innovation. Vermont's been known for ingenuity throughout its history. We could go to the bookshelves and just pull down a whole bunch on the things that have been invented here in the state of Vermont. So time will not permit a cataloging of those. But as somebody that's younger, that has been on the vanguard of remote work and idea generation and seeing how people are innovating in the 21st century, give us your thoughts on where innovation fits into the Vermont proposition.
Ooh. Give me a hard one. Yeah, I mean, I guess what just everybody's thinking, saying is, like, we need to think completely differently and think big. But I also think we're there's a lot of things that are tripping us up, holding us back from being able to be innovative. I don't want to like take it on a tangent, but I feel like we can't have this conversation and not mention things like housing. That, like, even if somebody created the next, like, say Microsoft or something in Vermont, and they needed people to move here, or a trade company that needed people to physically be in their company, there's nowhere for people to live. We have companies looking all the time in town and around, just everywhere, looking for people, and they have nowhere to move. And so we need to solve problems like that before we can get like super innovative. We need to be innovative with housing and the things that people, and broadband, and the things that people actually need in order to come here. Otherwise, they're not going to come here. Yeah.
We could spend a whole couple
Yeah,
hours.
it's a whole, yeah.
But it's great. And I'm glad that you used innovation and housing in the same thought, because Vermont is replete with some of the most progressive housing-oriented agencies in the country, in my view. So we have a unique moment with a lot of funding, unfortunately not going into Sam's seed capital fund, but it's going into a big push on some kind of moonshot housing ideas. We'll have to see if that can move the dial for us, Monique. Janet, anything resonating with you as someone that's lived on the vanguard of innovation throughout your career?
Yeah, so I think it's interesting, and people probably have different perspectives on this. And I've never asked Sam this question in terms of services they provide, but you know, I don't think our IP general knowledge level is very good in this state, having come from IBM, where it was. So just as a history point, right, when IBM was IBM here in Vermont, it had a huge push on patents and findings, and that's why Vermont was in the top 3 of patents per capita. And since that no longer exists in this state, and the company, the replacement company, is not as focused on that, we're going to move our way down to be in the bottom 5, which is like right above Louisiana. So I do think we could use some better, broader general education on patenting, IP, how to protect it. And I just don't think it's very accessible, and it's clearly not top of mind for most companies, but I think it's very important to protect your investment that way. And then another probably bank shot angle, and it also goes to workforce, assuming there's housing, is when we go to hire key technical resources to develop our next lines of technical products and very technical manufacturing processes, we are seeing a more diverse workforce want to apply, and whether those people need visa assistance, or even I will give an example down in Bellows Falls. We hired a wonderful engineer who's a Muslim, and we did not know how to incorporate that person into the Southern Vermont community, right? We didn't know whether there was a church for them, whether there was a peer group for them, anything like that. And so the diversity angle actually leads heavy because of the strength of the engineering and science resources from many other countries that we need. We need to not only bring those people in, but we have to make them feel comfortable. And it's very difficult, I think, when there's no one like them, no one else like them in the community. So I think our diversity focus is really important to bringing in some top technical talent, but also retaining that talent. And it's those kinds of skills that in the high-tech industries drive our innovation, right? We need that deep science. We need those deep engineers that get us to the next big thing that we do in our existing companies.
Thank you, Janette. Dr. Akande and Sam, feel free to jump in on this. This will be the last time I ask for the panel to weigh in, and then I'm going to turn to the queue of questions so that we can begin to direct those at each of you.
Let me just chime in quickly here. I think that the fundamentals of housing would be very, very attractive. Being able to not just attract young, dynamic minds to Vermont, but also to be able to say to them that we can give you something that you're not going to get anywhere else. And that is that we would also provide housing for a specified period of time to get you acclimated. And then for us to have a program that actually works to welcome them and assimilate them into the community. And then secondly, I think when we speak about diversity, one thing I want to underscore is that generational diversity is going to be what really will propel Vermont moving forward. And generational diversity is those young and audacious and creative minds that are basically from anywhere in the world. And to say to them, you bring your ideas and Vermont will invest in your ideas and invest in you and be able to take out all the bureaucratic nonsense that you would have to encounter to be able to set up business, and that we would ensure and enable your success. Creative innovation, compelling ideas of this nature is going to turn things around. And again, I want to underscore the importance of doing all these things in real time. I believe in planning. I believe there's the vitality of planning and articulation of ideas. But at some point, we've got to move beyond the conversation and start seeing real execution. I'm particularly concerned about the lack of adequate high-speed broadband in the state of Vermont. That presents a challenge and also an opportunity for Vermont to be able to address. And once you address that, I think again, being a very small state, you're able to address it fairly quickly and more efficiently, and then you can basically broadcast to the world that we've taken out one of the biggest fundamental hurdles in innovation: the ability to communicate, the ability to be able to engage. Come to Vermont, and we'll make that possible. That is a pivot reaction, and we need that more than ever nowadays.
Yeah, I'll just, I couldn't agree more, Dr. Akande. I did want to circle back on something that Janet had mentioned too, which is the IP focus. And just to sort of wrap that all together, I think, in October, we launched with 40 other support organizations, the Vermont Startup Collective, which is an online community for entrepreneurs, which, we thought was going to be a great sort of convener for folks in the state looking for support and for camaraderie or commissary, all the things that come with starting a business or joining a community. And we have almost 800 members. And all of the themes that we've just talked about are present on that. And one of the things is founders of companies saying, hey, I just offered 12 positions to these folks and I have nowhere to put them. So help, right? And then folks are jumping on with, oh, I know this person who has a housing opportunity, or have you checked out this Facebook group, and these sort of like undercover things that you would never find otherwise. And there's also conversations around IP, Janet. So we've been able to offer I think 3 IP events in the last year, from the USPTO through VSET to Vermonters. But we also have, I think, 3 or 4 patent attorneys that are on the Vermont Startup Collective offering their time and expertise to answer questions at no charge. Right, like right on the collective. So you can say, hey, when do I get a patent, right? Or how is this patentable? And they'll jump on there and help. So that's just one way that we're trying to sort of address that. And that's been really, really successful for new folks to Vermont as well. Folks that said, hey, I just moved up from Boston. I don't know anyone. I'm looking to move my company here. And that sort of goes back to that sort of direct, targeted, specific help. Because every entrepreneur is not the same, every problem is not the same, whether it's town to town, county to county, or different industries, right? Janet talked about the difference between a manufacturing company and a software company. Their needs are so different. And so if we can sort of target those folks when they come in, make them feel like part of our community, and then offer that direct assistance and answer those questions specifically with no judgment, that's what builds a community. And so I think obviously an issue like housing is something that if we could tackle, it would be incredible. But I think in the meantime, really helping one-on-one and really being generous with our time and paying it forward to folks, that's what I see make a difference in my day-to-day. Monique, did you want to touch on that?
Yeah. The Vermont Startup Collective is amazing. And I totally am in line with Sam as far as like creating a sense of community for people so that they feel like they're welcomed here and they have support to stay. One other thing I was thinking about after getting stuck on housing was that if we want people to be innovative, we need to encourage people to actually think outside the box and support them when they do. I feel like I've had so many conversations with people who come here and they're like, I had this business idea, I pitched it to a business advisor or a bank or something, and they shut it down because it's not a traditional thing that they're used to. It doesn't fit nicely into their business plan kind of modeling. And they had amazing ideas that they were super passionate about. And instead of like filling our getting the bank loan from the bank and filling it like a brick and mortar spot, they ended up, finding support from a Facebook group and then launching an Instagram business that is taking off, and selling nationally. And just things like that where we need to, and I think we need to encourage young kids. I think we need to have entrepreneurship programs in schools. I think we need to have maker spaces that kids are available to go to. And I think we need to mentor them in those and, say like, create, like, what do you have in that brain that you don't want to just like put out as a product or whatnot, and then help coach them through bringing that idea to life, and not squelching people because they don't fit into the traditional models that get funded traditionally. And being willing to take risks and actually encourage people to dream. I think we have to do that.
Well, that was engineering precision, Monique, because you ended right at 3 o'clock, and we've got 15 minutes for Q&A, so we are exactly spot on running this thing with great alacrity. So thank you. And I'm going to take a few of these questions now and just direct them around in a lightning round kind of way. But if I run out of time to thank each of the four of you for your contributions here today, let me now say, wow, this is exactly what Vermont needs. These kind of conversations, 1 hour at a time, where we start moving things and seeing some results. And I think we've got an opportunity. So thanks. Cassie Palimas of Vita, Janet, she says, Janet makes a great point about how public education is funded. Do you think having the dollars follow the students could lead to increasing educational standards and quality, in addition to the other benefits that you mentioned?
So just for clarity, right now the dollars do follow the student, and that's the disincentive for example, a high school to say, why don't you take your senior year at BTC, or why don't you go to the tech school? So the model has to be changed from following the student to be something more about, you know, what is an expected cost for a high school of so many people, or something like that. I don't know that there's a, I don't know what the right answer is. I'm sure there's plenty of models out there, but the problem today is the dollars follow the student, and with declining enrollments, the loss of $18,000 to a high school is a significant financial hit. So we have to change from that. And I think we need a more customer-based outcome, which is, you know, 2 years after high school, is that student productive and successful in any way, right? This doesn't mean college, it could be anything. And I think we'd end up with a better metric of the success of our system. We should be rewarding the high schools for moving students to the more appropriate location or academic background.
Thanks, Janet. Sam, Justin Will asks, what's the future of the gig economy in Vermont? Will employment continue to become less traditional? And if so, how will that affect these visions and initiatives?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think the gig economy is alive and well in Vermont. And I think that, you know, obviously I'm sort of at the eye of the storm there in terms of being at a co-working space. I think it's, first of all, it's really, really beneficial for folks that do want to start businesses, because you can sort of, you can float or bootstrap. You don't need to go for funding. And frankly, at VSET, we spend as much time as we can discouraging people from taking outside funding if they don't need to. So if you're able to sort of do gig-based work to fund your business, that's ideal. But where we're seeing it really, really take off, and this is sort of the opposite of what I was saying earlier, but with long-term internships, but micro internships or gig-based internships where students can take on a 3 or 4 week project for $600 and add something to their resume and get paid to do it. So I had just mentioned UVM, they launched their micro internship program this year and saw amazing success. And VSET actually partnered with them early on to make sure that there were Vermont startups putting jobs on that site. And so one example is just Easy Probate, which is a rapidly growing company that started here at VSET, expanded far beyond our walls to Hula, and they're hiring rapidly. And they took on 2 micro interns through UVM this past spring. So that's just another example of students that are able to maintain their experience and get paid to do this work. And that just sets them up, again, to have a career that's sticky, right? Where they can follow their passion and find the things that mean a lot to them with really low risk, right? Because it's a 3 or 4 week project. And same thing goes for, you know, solo founders or folks that have never hired before. That's a huge barrier that we see at VSET is solo founders that have never hired before because they're freaked out to do it because it's hard and it's confusing. And we don't offer a ton of resources to understand how to do that. So hiring a micro intern is one way to sort of dip your toe and get comfortable with being an employer. So I think, you know, the gig economy is here to stay. And I think it's an amazing way to support the structure of entrepreneurship in the state and make sure that folks are getting paid for the experience that they're getting. You're muted, Tom.
Thank you. Dr. Akande, Carrick Johnson says at least $2 billion is set to be invested in Vermont. I don't know if that's 2 billion coming up or 2 billion all in. But what criteria would you use to determine whether or not those funds were invested wisely? So if you were talking earlier and urging us in Vermont to cut through some of the conversation and some of the process and get into the action stage, if you had 2 billion to direct here in Vermont right now, what would be the first thing you would do? And we don't have time for all the things, unfortunately.
I just identify a couple of things. First of all, I would focus on how we basically change the broadband situation in the state. What do we do to ensure that within the next 18 months that we have internet access to every nook and corner, including the kingdom of Vermont. Secondly, I would put an RFP out there for institutions of higher learning to shape out a strategy for recruiting, retaining, and creating innovation within their institutions, and that those resources will be given to them in real time, again with a sense of urgency for return on that investment. And then thirdly, I would be very, again, my term of constructive impatience, that the government, sort of declare itself as a destination for the next innovators in the world, not just America. And what that would do is also help resolve the diversity challenge that we face all over this country, and that is to be able to attract individuals from everywhere. And that what we're saying to them is that we want them to bring their best ideas to us. We want them to bring their creative energy to us, and that we will do whatever we will meet them halfway to ensure that those ideas actually come to fruition. With $2 billion, you can move the needle. With $2 billion, you can become a destination. With $2 billion, Vermont will be able to do the ultimate pivot in the post-pandemic world.
Thank you very much. Because there is such good dialogue happening in chat and Q&A right now, I apologize to all that have been viewing this session that we won't be able to get to all of them. But I do hope that Meg, who is our tech host, will be capturing all of these comments and questions. And if possible, if she could direct them out to our panel, then I won't speak for all the panelists, but I'll speak for myself. We'll do our best to try to give you the benefit of the intellect that's among this group in some way, shape, or form, so we could answer the question or the comment that you put on chat or Q&A. So I'm going to use the last few minutes that we have to give each of you about 90 seconds to kind of wrap up your thoughts and around this conversation. And I realize it's only a beginning, and kind of your print, if you will, on this summit for the future of Vermont and what you want to leave on the record. So I'll go in reverse order of how I introduced you. So yes, I see you smiling, Monique. You're up first.
Oh, it should be Sam.
Sam,
I was like, yes,
sorry.
I'm going second.
I'm sorry. I think I do owe you one though. So why don't you go ahead and start, and then we'll go to Sam.
Such pressure. Yeah. Let's see. I don't know. I have like a whole 5 minutes tomorrow to leave my print on this summit. I actually wanted to. There was a Q&A that came in from Justin Will, and I think I'm going to use that for my 90 second. Talking about RDC's Regional Development Corps and Regional Planning Commission Corps. Trying to figure out, like, there's all these problems that we have in Vermont, and how do we actually leverage the people we have and the brilliant minds we have here in order to be innovative and solve problems that we actually need, rather than people waiting and saying, well, I don't know I don't know how to apply my skills. I don't know what's needed, and being able to actually throw some money at that. I think that kind of thinking and having, like Sam said, more collaboration in the fact that, people don't know that there's however many technical assistance providers in every corner of the state. And by that, I mean people who are willing to do one-on-one business support services for people. And people just don't realize that exists. And so I think we need to be, I'm still in conversations all the time, like housing, where the people are in different organizations covering the same exact area are talking about the same exact thing, serving the same exact people, the same exact resources, but they've never talked to each other like ever once. Select boards from different towns that are neighboring, not talking to each other. And I think that's like a big thing with the ARPA money is the governor and kind of like the different tiers. They're all talking about what they're doing with the money, but there's no guidance for like individual towns. There's no way for individual towns to work together to see how each other are spending money. So I just think we need to be innovative. And I love that problem solving that Justin brought up, and trying to figure out ways to actually communicate with each other in a lot better way to leverage the innovation that we do have here and the brilliance that we do have.
Great job, Monique. Thank you so much. Sam, I now realize the Roach came before the Gerber, but we'll Gerber you up and put you next.
Perfect. Yeah, I was gonna say I shouldn't have hyphenated, but you saved me, Tom. Yeah, I mean, how do you sort of sum up in 90 seconds? But I was looking over some of these, like, and these questions are just, it shows the brilliance of Vermonters, because I'm like trying not to read them because they're so brilliant and offer so much context, but then I'm not listening. So I think, and the points that have been brought up there are just so great. And I think the important thing to remember is it's simple, but ask for help, ask for what you need, right? If there's something standing in your way, just ask. Ask for connections, ask for resources, ask other people how they've solved their problems. When we advise entrepreneurs or aspiring entrepreneurs at VSET, the first question I ask them is, what's standing in your way, right? You came here today because something is standing in your way. Sometimes it's confidence, sometimes it's funding, sometimes it's commercial space. But it's always something. And our philosophy is, how can we remove those barriers? What can we do right now to solve that? So that might be our Scale Here program, where we, as an accelerator type program, we're able to get hundreds of thousands of free cloud credits for startups, right? Because VSET is an accelerator or incubator type entrepreneurial support organization. And through that, we've been able to give, hundreds of companies, I think over $1.5 million in free services. So putting money directly back into the pockets of entrepreneurs. That's just one example, right? And it's simple, it's small, but it makes a difference. So for all of these people that are facing these challenges personally or not feeling heard, reach out to others, like really reach out to other people, because they want to help. And the state does have so many free resources and people that just are there to help. So that's what I would say is ask for help when you need it, and continue to network like a rock star, like we say here at VSET. And our world is a lot smaller than you might think.
Sam, thanks very much. Janet?
I guess for me, a couple of things. One is whenever I'm part of a panel or an initiative like this, and maybe it's because I've spent my life in manufacturing, it's like, so what do I have to get done in the next week, 30 days, and 90 days? And I would hope that everybody who's participating in this, particularly the people that live here in Vermont, ask themselves that question, because I think I do believe in having a great vision of where we're going to go, but I also believe in making sure we take the steps. And I'm not sure we're always as good at that. So I guess I would put that out there as a challenge. I also have seen some comments from Mr. Marshall that I think will drive innovation. And it really becomes a question of, if we cannot grow our population in particular, if we can attract new people in, what does that look like and how do you survive it? And I think that in and of itself will bring tremendous change and innovation for those that continue to thrive, versus those that will not be able to survive without it. And in particular, it'll be things like automation. It'll be things like being able to remotely access skilled employees in other countries and states. And so I think we have to be, while we may have a goal to grow our population and our people, I think knowing that there's also a place of, so what are we going to do if we can't, and how are we still going to survive, I think is just as important a question.
Thank you, Janet. Dr. Akande, you can take us out of this panel. It went way too fast.
I'm going to end with a very simple story. If you recall the nudist story of Alice in Wonderland, And that remarkable conversation between Alice and the Cheshire Cat, I think it was in chapter 17. And it was a conversation about Alice asking the cat, which way should I go? And the cat responding, well, it depends where you want to get to. I think the question is simple. I think the answer is simpler. And that is, where does Vermont want to be? And if we know what we want, where we want to be, if we know what impact that we're trying to make, I think we can ask the question that which we can provide the right answer. And I am convinced beyond a shadow of a doubt that there is the energy, there is a focus in that state. The commitment of the leadership is unequal. We saw it during COVID crisis. Vermont has a real opportunity to make the ultimate pivot and to do it in a post-pandemic world. I'm confident about it because I know I've engaged the people of Vermont. I'm looking forward to hearing some great news in the next couple of years, perhaps a couple of months. Thanks for allowing me to participate.
Well, we wish you all the best in your next adventures and a very important assignment. So stay well. And everyone on the panel, thank you so much. I am so inspired for the future of our state. And thank you to Paul Costello and his staff. Thank you to Senator Leahy and everybody out there on this summit. Let's keep Vermont moving. We've got a great thing. Over and out. Thanks.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you.
Bye.